Hello my friends and fellow VEDSies. So I mentioned a bit ago that my campaign where I played Breena, my beloved little forest gnome circle of the forest druid, ended. We finished up in late November of last year and I still am not over it. I'm very attached to that character. But since the story is over now, I thought that I could give you guys the entire thing in one go. I actually wrote the whole dang thing for the group at one point, and so I'm just sort of going to be using that as an outline for this, as I imagine I might need to give you more context in certain spots and less in others. So our story starts with Patricia and Eddie Russell, who are a pretty normal human couple, and the only thing that really stands out is that despite really wanting to have kids, they've never been able to have one, and so they go to adopt and they meet this baby little gnome girl who can fit in the palm of their hands, and they decide that they're going to keep Breena safe no matter what. Unfortunately, they didn't really think about their parenting strategy beyond that. They kept Breena intensely sheltered. The only times she even left the house were to go to the library with her mother or to go hiking and camping with her father. But Breena didn't really mind. She didn't know better, and she was a voracious reader and a lover of the outdoors. And combined, those led to her having a near encyclopedic knowledge of all things plants, animals, geology, etc. When she was 12, Breena and her father went on one of their many camping trips and woke up to see that flowers had grown through the tent surrounding her sleeping bag. It seemed that all of these years of loving nature had manifested themselves, and Breena became a druid. Breena was very excited about this, but her father was not. It only added to the guilt he was feeling because as he was watching his daughter get older, he saw that she wasn't changing. He suggested on multiple occasions that they get Breena ready to go to high school so she could have a normal teenage experience, but Patricia shut that down. The next year, when she was 13, the father-daughter duo went to their favorite campsite, and Breena was very eager to show the owner of the campsite, Acacius, her powers because she knew he was a druid. He was very happy for her, but explained that druids can't exist in a vacuum, that they need to have a community to help them learn and grow, and they need to join a circle to gain their additional abilities. But because he was a member of the Circle of the Forest, he could help her with that. And he gave his daughter permission and continued setting up the tent while Breena got to evolve her powers. This did not go over well with Patricia, who was furious that he had let their daughter go off with a stranger. They'd known him for years, but not particularly well. It was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back with their marriage, but they didn't want to get a divorce in front of Breena or tell her about the divorce ahead of time, so they decided that they were going to send her away for the summer, and that when she would come back, it would just be like, hey, we're separating, who do you want to live with? And that would be that. And so they decided to send her to Camp Dunkel Hill, a summer camp for aspiring adventurers. Breena was assigned to Cabin 8 with 4 other campers and their counselor. There was Esther, the extremely guarded goth human warlock, Ezekiel, the sad boy capitalist hobgoblin paladin, Mal, the hyperactive, kind of a dragonborn, not exactly rogue, and Parsi, the sea elf wizard who swung between being the brain cell of the group and the most reckless one in the whole party, like a pendulum. And their camp counselor Viz, a changeling monk who had been dragged out of the kitchen after a last-minute staffing change, and they were not happy that they had 2 people. Breena was sort of thrown in the deep end here, aside from the fact that Parsi also liked books. These people were very different from her. They were lying and cursing and breaking all of the rules, and she really didn't know what to make of it. In particular, there were these Bacchus fruit trees on the campus, which were forbidden because when you eat it, some random magical effect occurs. And the willingness of her cabin mates to fuck with this was a lot for Breena, and she nearly tattled within the first 48 hours. However, bigger problems started to distract her from that. Monsters started attacking campers, which should have been impossible. Between them getting attacked on a mission, and Ezekiel threatening to sue the camp, and multiple members of Cabin 4 getting totally laid to waste, the kids in Cabin 8 decided that they needed to do something about this. And when Parsi's familiar Aves found strange activity going on at a volcano in the forest nearby, they theorized that maybe that might have something to do with it, because the Cabin 4 kids got attacked by a fire elemental after all. Breena had not been interested in sneaking out. She had just wanted to help the counselors investigate. But she was the only one with any healing ability and was not going to let her new friends just fucking die. But they were going to need a distraction if they were going to sneak out, and at one point they thought that the Bacchus fruit might do a good job of that. But they also didn't want to kill or seriously injure anybody, and so while different aspects of the plan were being put into place, Breena was sent to go negotiate with the camper who experimented with the fruits. That camper, Kakia, proposed a deal. All of her information in exchange for Breena taking a bite to aid in the experiment. No one else had had anything bad happen to them, so Breena decided to break a rule for the first time in her life. And of course, it immediately went very poorly for her. Specifically, she had been turned into a wooden statue, and by the time that was able to be fixed, not only had her parents been informed of the fact that she had broken a rule and gotten herself hurt, her friends had gotten attacked and nearly died. She had thought that maybe she could prove that she could take care of herself and be good, but that was clearly out the window, so Breena just doubled down on the rule breaking. As they were running away, she tried to explain this to the others, but it was hard because she herself didn't fully have a grasp of it. But Parsi took her seriously, and in that moment of distress gave her his best friend's phone number so that she had someone to contact in case the group got separated. His phone at that point had been destroyed, and they weren't sure which adults to trust, so this was a pretty big deal. They traveled through the forest, a dangerous Fae-influenced place called the Glade Chaser Woods, and in the process discovered a cult of wildfire druids named the Viscari who wanted to burn the world down. While they were lost in the woods, the cult succeeded in burning down the camp. And if that wasn't bad enough, they found out that Ezekiel's billionaire abusive father was working with the cult. And Breena had been reported missing to the police. Things got more and more intense, and by the time they tried to seize camp back, Breena had tortured, killed, learned a bunch of swear words, played truth or dare, and been smuggled across the country. As you can imagine, 5 teenagers versus an entire cult did not go well. Viz, who had gone undercover with the cult, had been forced to drag them away, basically kicking and screaming. They were brought to entertainment mogul and Parsi's estranged father, Ilario von Meer, aka Wizard Walt Disney. He insisted that they let the adults take care of it, which they were not on board with, but didn't really have a choice, and so spent a while staying with Parsi's mother, Selena. The more time Breena spent away from her parents, the more she realized she was missing, and the more she questioned their decisions. She tried to explain this to a few different people. Parsi, Selena, the assistant director of Camp Selza, Layla, the woman who started appearing in her dreams, but it was very difficult for her to put it into words. Eventually, Ilario realized that if he didn't let the kids help, they were just going to run away again. So he let them in on the big secret, which was that he, Selza, and Viz were part of a secret organization. Their goal was to maintain the boundaries between the different planes of existence. It was not an easy task, as in the world there are several planar fault lines where different types of planar energy leak into the world. One such area of leakage is the Glade Chaser Woods, which got its strangeness from the Feywild. There was an artifact, the Eyes of the Wild, which could be used to maintain some control of this boundary, but it had been stolen by the Viscari. Ilario tasked Viz and the kids with working with some of his contacts to try and figure out how the artifact could be retrieved. Unfortunately, the contact in question was in Breena's hometown. The closer they got to Breena's hometown, the worse her anxiety got, but it wasn't just going home that was causing that. Parsi and Esther had this huge fight that was just a total train wreck. Esther had this cursed item on, and she didn't believe Breena when she was saying that it was cursed and modifying her memory. And they realized that Layla, the woman in Breena's dreams, was actually Leylatha Nerexidor, the head of the Viscari cult, and the spell she was using to get into Breena's dreams could just as easily be used to torture her as it was to manipulate her. Like, Parsi had a spell that could help with that, thank God, but Breena was still terrified of going to sleep and the vulnerability that that brought. So she was a train wreck when they reached her hometown of Ferndale Valley. But it was also the very first birthday she got to spend with friends. And so while the others were hunting down information, she and Viz stayed in the hotel and bonded because Viz had been a kid in the foster system. They offered that if Breena decided that she couldn't stay with her parents, she was welcome on Viz's house bus. She needed answers, and Bree also felt bad that her parents didn't know if she was dead or not. And so after they had settled everything they needed to in town, she decided to stop by. And it did not go well. They were extremely dismissive, did not take the danger that Breena personally was in seriously, and the fact that they were getting a divorce behind her back was also very distressing to her. And the fact that they called the police to try and force her to stay didn't help. As she got away, Parsi and Ezekiel, who had been the most vocal against her parents, lingered. Parsi went to town on her mother to the point that Patricia slapped him in the face and he just kept going. Ezekiel healed the slap and Parsi made him swear to secrecy before they also got out of there, just before the police showed up. Bree was a train wreck, and forcing Ezekiel to tell her what had happened didn't help. She was furious at her mother, don't get me wrong, but after so many insistences that she deserved and could handle not being coddled, Parsi hiding it from her was also extremely upsetting. As they hunted for the Eyes of the Wild, breaking into multiple of Ezekiel's father's buildings, Breena was in a constant state of crisis. and the fact that Ezekiel kept reminding them that his father's men wouldn't hesitate to kill them didn't exactly help. However, during a heist, Breena was brought face to face with Ezekiel Thompson Sr. With her friends in danger, standing in front of this giant evil man, Breena found a confidence she had never known before. Though the fight that ended with Senior falling to his death Wile E. Coyote style was intense, that a meditation in the woods and hashing things out with Parsi really led to Breena coming into her own. Which was good, because Breena kind of needed to step up as a leader in that moment. Ezekiel's father had died. Viz's house bus got destroyed. Mal discovered she was a dragon whose soul got split in half. Esther's evil cloak tried to kidnap her. Parsi shut down for a bit because he almost killed Esther and Breena. The timing really couldn't have been better. But despite their many challenges, they were able to retrieve the Eyes of the Wild, and naturally, Breena attunes to it. Now, with the artifact on their side, it was possible to plan the attack to get back camp, destroy the Viscari, and also protect Esther's warlock patron. As they were preparing for battle, Breena used a computer for the first time and found out that her biological mother was a woman named Julia Mintrunner. Julia had gotten pregnant as a teenager and given her up for adoption, and now ran a coffee shop in Breena City. The battle for Camp Dunkel Hill was intense, to say the least. Esther's mom was nearly a human sacrifice, Leilotha momentarily killed Parsi, a volcano monster was summoned, and there was an eldritch battle. However, the kids and their allies were able to win in the end. In the aftermath of the battle, Ilario explained that he had already begun the process of ensuring that the Russells would lose custody of Breena, and Breena and Viz decided that they were gonna get an apartment somewhere together. And when Breena met Julia, it was obvious that that apartment should be in Breena City. Transitioning into high school was not easy. Breena had gone from not being allowed to watch public television to killing cultists, so transitioning to just high school was a lot. It took a lot of support and a lot of therapy, but she was able to adjust. She lived with Viz, she worked part-time in the coffee shop with Julia, and was a photographer for the yearbook. And she's got to have that experience of being a normal-ish teenager. When she got accepted to Ansdell University, the school where Parsi already attended, and she, Esther, and Mal had all agreed to have as their first choice, Breena joined one of those groups for incoming freshmen, one of those group chats. There she met Xavier, a drow boy who also lived in Breena and was planning on majoring in theater in the fall. They hit it off right away, and when they went to Ansdell, it was as a couple. College was another tricky transition. Breena had a triple major in chemistry, biology, and geology, and was also transitioning into living with Mal, the most chaotic person she knew. However, the stress was at its worst when she discovered that Xavier was cheating on her. She ran to her apartment to cry, only to realize that she'd forgotten her key. That's why Parsi, who lived across the hall with Esther, found her sobbing in the hallway. And in that moment, he stepped up to take care of her in her time of need, just like he always had. Things changed after that. Parsi and Breena had always been close, even among Cabin 8 kids, but that night set something off for both of them. They were both uselessly in love with each other, but also both convinced that it was one-sided and that if they shared their feelings, it would ruin the entire friendship. This began the tortuous year of pining, which only ended when Esther wasn't able to join Parsi at one of his father's galas, and so he had no choice but to invite Breena. Meanwhile, during all of this, Breena realized that all of the science she was studying would be very useful to conservation, which was what she wanted to do, but that she missed the creativity she found in photography. So she decided to shuffle things around and add a minor in photography. Parsi finished his master's at the same time that Breena finished her bachelor's, and so they had considered moving in together right after college. However, there were a couple of reasons they decided not to. Firstly being that Breena had centuries ahead of her and wanted to prove to herself that she could be independent and live on her own should she need to. The other was that Parsi had been offered an apprenticeship by a wizard they knew, which was going to be a great opportunity and really help him with his doctorate. But the wizard in question was in Ferndale Valley, Breena's hometown, so they were long distance for a bit. This was another tricky time for Breena. She was totally capable of living on her own, but it wasn't easy being as alone as she was in the city. Plus, she was the youngest person at her work at Fosby and Geographic by a lot. Luckily, one rainy night, she discovered another lonely soul in the form of an old grumpy cat with abandonment issues named Mr. Whiskers. Though he didn't like people anymore, given his abandonment issues, he grew very fond of Breena and grew to tolerate the people Breena was fond of. Breena was 30 when she and Parsi finally got married. At that point, she was an award-winning photojournalist, and he was a successful professor and researcher of the arcane. A few years later, Mal and Ezekiel's daughter Amelia was born. The girl was chaos from the beginning, but despite that, Parsi and Breena fell in love with the child. Breena, being the godmother, didn't hurt. Naturally, that got them thinking about having children of their own, which they hadn't planned on doing so early given their long lifespans, but by the time Amelia was 3, they were trying. 2 years later, Salvatore Finney and Leroy Von Meer was born. Post-maternity leave, Breena took up an editing position with Fosby and Geographic. It wasn't the same as being out in the field, but she was still able to make a difference with her conservation efforts. When Sal was 2, the combination of having a 2-year-old and Breena being pregnant meant that it became apparent that their apartment in Anstall wasn't going to cut it anymore. They found land in a small town named Astershire and built a home perfectly designed for their family's needs and tastes. Mavis, named after Viz, Abigail Esther Von Meer, was born not long after they moved in. A few years later, Breena was pregnant again, this time with twins. And even for twins, it was an arduous pregnancy, and going into labor a month early did not help with that. Selza Morgana Ziva von Meer was born after a long labor, but the stress on Breena's heart nearly killed her, and the doctors were forced to operate to retrieve Guinevere Selina Eleanor von Meer and to save Breena's life. Even beyond her work at Fosby and Geographic, Breena was very active in conservation and Druidic circles, to the point that she got a hummingbird species named after her. That's not that important, but I love that I included that in the lore. In addition, over the years, she became a key member of the Circle of the Forest, and many people assumed that she would be the successor of the current Archdruid, to the point that they already had a title picked out for her. Breena von Meer, the Eyes of the Wild. Bree returned to her original photography job after all of the kids were in school, though she did not go on the month-long expeditions anymore. It was more of long weekends. They settled into a really nice life, with Breena working in conservation and photography, and Parsi teaching at the University of Anstall, and all of them living in Astershire away from the craziness associated with the Von Meer name. Time went on, the kids grew up, the friends with shorter lifespans passed on, and when Breena was around 270, the current Archdruid of the Circle of the Forest passed. Again, a lot of people assumed that she was going to just take it, but that would increase her lifespan to the point that she would outlive at least 4 generations of her family, which was simply unacceptable. And while she never regretted that decision, it certainly had its drawbacks. The difference between a gnomish and an elvish lifespan became more obvious as Breena lost mobility, youth, and independence. I will spare you most of the lifespan angst and say that Breena was very aware that she was going to go first and made sure to have all of her affairs in order to make things as easy as possible for her family, specifically her husband. And at 482, Breena suffered a heart attack, and when they realized she wasn't going to bounce back, she convinced Parsi to teleport them to the forests near Astonshire. They were together when she passed, and when the forest floor swallowed her whole. The lilac tree and the snowdrops below it forever bloomed, and at long last, Breena, Geraldine, Snowdrop, Mintrunner, Russell, Von Meer, the eyes of the wild, was one with the forest at last. So yeah, I really love what happened with Breena's story. It's very special to me. Her entire life is established at this point, and I love how the story evolved over time and the person that she grew into. I'm very proud of her, which I know is silly because she's a fictional character, but I'm proud of her. And I hope that you enjoyed this. My friends and fellow VEDSies, I will see you tomorrow.